Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we will be discussing the net psychology questions for June 2014 examination paper 3. The paper 3 had total of 75 questions. We will be taking 15 questions in each set. So let's first start with the first set of questions here. So the first set of questions we'll start with. So it's with this question that using multi-axial system of DSM-4-TR paranoid personality could be coded as. So as we all know, the DSM classification gave 5 axes. So let's first discuss all the 5 of those. So it's axis 1 that talks about major depressive disorders. Okay. Then you have axis 2 that talks about paranoid personalities and borderline personalities, so personality disorders. Then you have axis 3 that talks about general medical conditions. You have axis 4 that talks about the psychosocial or the environmental effect like loss of job or something like that. Then you have axis 5 which deals with general adaptability of functions mainly under children below age of 18 years. So these are the 5 axes that were described in DSM-4, that is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 4th. And the answer here would be axis 2 because it talks about paranoid disorder and borderline personality disorders. Now, the next question is match the following. Here you have a set of authors and a set of statements that are given. Okay, what you have to do is you have to find out which statement corresponds to which author. So Albert won the Nobel Prize for Physiology, and he said, discovery consists of seeing what everybody has seen and thinking what nobody thought about. That means if you want to discover something, you are seeing what everyone can see, but you are thinking beyond what everyone can think. So that was what Albert Won stated about discovery. The next statement we talk about Tacticus Agirola. He talked about that it's human nature to hate those whom we have injured. So talking about injury, and the cause of injury was the area of tactical agricola. Then you have about social context. So since it's social contact and socialism theory, it is propounded by Karl Marx. So Karl Marx says mere social contact begets a stimulation of animal spirits that heightens the efficiency of each individual workman. So this statement was given by Karl Marx. And finally you have Spencer. Spencer talked about the opinion is ultimately determined by feeling and not intellect. So he talked more about feelings and not about intelligence. Okay. So these were the famous authors who gave the following statements. Now let's move on to the next set of questions here. We'll start with question 3. So you have question 3 here. Which of the following are the features of behavioral assessment? Now first let's understand what is behavioral assessment. Behavioral assessment is an approach where we try to understand the ever-changing human behavior and the context in which we are talking about the human behavior. So basically, when we talk about behavioral assessment, we say few things. First, it's ever-changing. Since it's ever-changing, you must have different views about it. Then, you must be able to collect self-reported samples, which are reported by yourselves. Okay. Then researcher must try to focus on interaction between situation and behavior. So there should be interaction between situation and behavior. So that is what is behavioral assessment. Okay. And it's not necessary that behavior must be recorded in live settings. For example, if I am seeing a video recording of a child who is constantly crying to get something, okay, if I see that child in live setting, I can do a behavioral assessment that okay, he wants this toy, or else he is very he is very forceful that he should get that toy. But I will have the same conclusion in the videotape behavior also. I can say that the child is either too pampered. I can say that in live settings as well as videotape settings. So statement 4 is not applicable. So all the three statements besides 4 are correct. So you have 1, 3 and 4, 1, 2 and 3 which are correct. Okay. The next is the question, the concept of creative intelligence. The concept of creative intelligence, as we know, was given by Sternberg. Now, what did exactly Sternberg said? Sternberg said that there are three mental processes behind intelligence. The processes are known as meta components, performance components, okay, and finally you have the knowledge acquisition. So these three are the basic things that we talk about in the concept of creative intelligence, in the concept of what Sternberg gave in his theory. Now, based on these three, he gave three components of intelligence. First is analytical, then you have creative, and finally you have the practical. Okay, so these are the three concepts that were given by Sternberg. So the correct answer here is Sternberg. Now, last theory talks about equity model of work motivation. Equity model talks about the output of A divided by input of A would be equal to output of B divided by input of B. Now let's understand how. So what are the output and the input? So input can be in the form of time, loyalty, hard work, ability to do things, your tolerance, your level of personal sacrifices, determination, and so on. What would be the outcomes? Outcome can be salary, your job promotions, then your reputation, responsibility, your goodwill, thanks, praise, or any other benefit or bonus that you are getting. So you have the inputs and the outputs. Now let's understand the equity theory. Equity theory says that there is a relational satisfaction in terms of perception, and that perception can be of fair or unfair means. So either there is a fair perception, fair distribution of resources, or there is an unfair distribution of resources. What we need to explain here is relational satisfaction, and this concept was given by Adams, where he talked about the inputs and the outputs as we discussed, and that is the relation he propounded between the input and the output. Now let's move on to the next set of questions here. So the next set of questions, the first question, people who do well in embedded figure test have dash perceptual cognitive style. Now what does doing well in embedded figure test means? What is embedded figure test? For example, there is a diagram, okay, in which there are small, say, balloons there among a big picture, and those balloons are hidden, for example. Okay, so a field dependent person, what will happen, will not be able to identify these balloons. He will be seeing this whole picture as one and will be unable to identify what is within the picture, while a field independent person will be able to identify the balloons present here, because there is field independence and he is not seeing this whole picture as one. He is able to break up the picture into small parts and see what is the composition of the exact figure. Okay, so people who do well on embedded figure test are usually field independent people. Now, the next question is, you have some concepts and the theorists related to it. Now, law of effect, as we know, is propounded by Thorndike. Thorndike claimed that a good action would be motivated and a bad action would be discouraged. So there is a direct correlation between good action, pleasant action, which is repeated again and again, and unpleasant behavior, which is not repeated. The next is Tolman. Tolman gave the concept of cognitive map, or he said there is a mental representation in our mind of things that we see in the nature. For example, I went to a picnic, I saw everything there, I came back and I want to explain that to my friend. So what happens is, I have a mental picture in my mind. Okay, these were the places that were good, and there was a lot of greenery, there was a lot of rivers flowing across. Okay, so that is my mental representation of the things that I have in mind. Next is chaining and shaping. There is a bit difference between shaping and chaining. Shaping is, you are reinforcing approximations of desired behavior. For example, I know doing this is good. Okay, so I'll ask my child to continuously do that. So it's successive approximations. With each successive progression, he will do much better than the previous effort. And what is chaining? Chaining involves you have one response and that leads to occurrence of another response. Okay, so that is what is shaping and chaining. And this concept was given by Skinner. So shaping and chaining given by Skinner. And finally you have Bandura who gave the concept of modeling or imitation, where you try to copy one, see someone and copy the phenomena. Now the next question is, an experimenter wishes to chemically stimulate the brain. Now chemical stimulation, for chemical stimulation you need a neuroexcitatory thing that can excite the nervous system. Okay, so the examples of neuroexcitatory amino acids are glutamic acid and cyanic acid. So this is something that you need to remember. It's more of learning rather than knowing. Okay. So next question is language development model proposed by Jerome Bernard. Now what did Jerome Bernard exactly said? Jerome Bernard basically proposed social interaction, and he said that development in the cognition development in cognition and language occur simultaneously. Okay, so what he propounded is there is a language acquisition support system that is developed, and that what does is it provides meaningful language that is acquired by the child as a result of parent-child interaction. So you have parent-child interaction, and while they are interacting, children catch up some words which are really meaningful. So they develop a language acquisition support system which we call as LASS also. So this concept was given by Jerome Bernard in his theory, which mainly focused on social interaction. So he said that anything that comes into human being or is accepted by human being is mainly based on social interaction. Now the next question is a really difficult and a challenging, tricky question. Now similar question was there last year also. In December 2013, we have discussed it in the previous section. Now what is Promax rotation? 90% of the students are gone here because they don't even know what is rotation, what is oblique rotation, what is orthogonal rotation. So let's first start with what is orthogonal rotation and oblique rotation and their examples. So in the oblique rotations, the factors are correlated. While in orthogonal rotation, factors are uncorrelated. That's the first and foremost thing. Now what are factors and what does it mean by correlated and uncorrelated? Now when you have 20 items for example, okay, and what I am trying to do is, I am trying to find a relation between these 20 items. What I will do, I will say whether these items are intermittently related or not. For example, I am going into a field survey to a village. I'll talk about water, power, sanitation, sewerage. Okay, so let me say sanitation and sewerage are related. So there might be an factors that are correlated. So you can apply oblique factors concept here. Okay, while in the orthogonal you can apply which are uncorrelated. For example, water has nothing to do with power. Okay, both are important but nothing to do with each other. So that is a kind of uncorrelated factors. Now what are the examples of orthogonal and oblique rotation? So under orthogonal you have Verimax, you have Quantimax, and you have Equamax. So these are the orthogonal rotation. Now let's understand the oblique rotations. So oblique rotations you have Oblimin, then you have Quartimin, and finally you have the Promax. So the reason is correct. Promax rotation results in oblique factors. So that is correct. Now let's understand this in a bit detail. So as we said, orthogonal rotation produces factors that are uncorrelated while oblique produces correlated factors. Now if the factors are correlated, their correlation can be factored. Because I am saying the factors are correlated, I am able to correlate the factors. Okay. Now when we are trying to correlate the factors, what you do? The factors which arise directly from the variable are the primary factors. Okay. So you have primary factors directly from the variable. Then you have secondary factors. What are secondary factors? Secondary factors are those which are extracted from the primary factors and so on. So you have tertiary factor and quaternary factors. So all factors after primary factors, except primary factors, all factors are higher order factors. So we understand this term now. What are higher order factors? So higher order factors are all factors except primary factors. Okay. Now, since all except primary factors are higher order factors, you can apply Promex rotative factors can be considered as higher order factors, because we can say that primary factors are more specific, and so they should predict more specific variables than the secondary factors. So that's why we can say Promex rotated factors are subjected to higher order factor analysis. So this statement is incorrect. It should be can, and this statement is correct. So A is false and R is true is the correct answer for this question. And this question is considered to be a very tricky and dicey question. Now the next question is kind of question based on rote memory. So again, now there was the achievement motivation concept. This was given by Macleay. Okay, and he used the TAT analysis, that is one of the projective tests to understand this, while Winter used power motivations by means of verbal material, okay, to explain the concept of power motivation. So power motivation is concerned with the impact and the prestige in the form of social power. So it talks about aggression, drinking, or how you can tackle extreme risky situations. Okay, so this is basically based on verbal phenomena, more of verbal phenomena. Now you have a list of theorists and the theory is given. So you have to match which theory is given by whom. So here is the list. Now let's understand the facial feedback theory that was propounded by Tompkins. So facial feedback theory by Tompkins explained that facial movements can help you understand emotions. Okay, so a person who is forced to smile, for example, if I am into a social gathering and my mood is very off, but my friends make me forceful that I should smile during the gathering. So when I start smiling artificially, slowly and gradually, what happens? My mood becomes good and I really feel happy and smile from within. So that is facial feedback hypothesis. When you are into such a situation, you start to automatically adopt that situation. The next is Smith and Ellsworth gave the concept of appraisal. So they gave the concept of unexplained arousal and appraisal of situation to understand the concept of emotions. Then you have Shetner and Singer who gave the two factors. So basically, sorry, pardon me, Smith and Ellsworth gave the concept of dimensional appraisal, okay, while Shetner and Singer gave the concept of unexplained arousal and arousal of situation. So Shetner SS gives you situational arousal. So you have appraisal of situations, and Smith and Ellsworth talk about dimensional appraisal. So you have appraisal of various dimensions. Okay, and finally is the Lazarus theory. Lazarus talks about personal meaning. So Lazarus talks about the personal meaning. Okay. So these are the various theories where you talk about interaction and experiences. Now the next question is a very tricky and interesting question. It's based on psychology of law basically. So we are talking about eyewitnesses here. So what happens here is, who is an eyewitness? For example, there is a roadside accident. Okay, all the bystanders or the people who have witnessed that accident would be the eyewitnesses. So these five, for example, are the eyewitness. Now, if I call them to courtroom after a few days, what would they tell me is totally based on memory. So what they are basically doing during this phenomena is recall of memory. Okay, when a recall of memory is done, there is a very big issue that there can be misidentification. For example, there are two people who look similar. I can say, oh, this was the person who has committed the crime rather than the other one. Because it is based on memory recall and there is high chances of misidentification, and misidentification or false identification. So defense attorneys often protest prosecutors' use of eyewitness testimony because source errors may cause eyewitness to make false identification because of the source. If there is the period of dusk, okay, it's not that bright sunlight over there, it's very easy for a person to make false identification or not able to recognize the face of someone very accurately. Okay, so this is an important thing to understand. It's based on rather a simple logic. Now next question. You have few terms and the related things. Now what is incidence? Incidence means how many new cases are there. Okay, so for example, I can say Ebola is a virus that is spreading. So what is the incidence rate? That means how many new cases are reported every time. Prevalence is how large or how much population is affected or is under the Ebola virus. So that is prevalence. Now what is the difference between syndrome and epidemiology? Syndrome is basically the collection of symptoms. Okay, so for example, I say a person is suffering from Down syndrome. Okay, so if I say Down syndrome, I give a list of symptoms that these 5 symptoms are a must for a patient to be classified under Down syndrome. Okay, so that is what is syndrome. Then what is epidemiology? Epidemiology is basically I am trying to study the distribution of health related issues or events in a specific population. So study of distribution of diseases and health related problems in a given population would be known as epidemiology. Okay, so these are few of the terms most of the students usually get confused with. Now we'll talk about the next concept, a bit conceptual, not that difficult. People maintain buffer zones around their bodies. What is buffer zone? For example, every person tries to maintain their personal space. Now what is personal space? Personal space means I can say the proximity with which I interact to someone. So it would be different for family, it would be different for friends, and it would be rather different for social public, anyone whom you are dealing in public. So you have defined your own personal spaces and you define the personal space based on the familiarity with others near to them. So if there is a family person, I know my personal space is much smaller. If I know, if I have friends around me, I know my personal space is a bit bigger. And finally, if there is a public, I'll try to maintain a requisite distance. So that is what is personal space. So it depends on the extent of familiarity. That's the most important thing. So reason is correct. And also people maintain buffer zones around their body. So that is what we are talking about, the personal space here. So people try to maintain the personal space. Both statements are correct, but they are not related. Why they are not related? Because one first statement talks about what is personal space, and second is statement talks about factors affecting personal space. Okay, so we have two things which are talking about separate things here. So with this we finish the first set of 15 questions for today. We will be covering the next set of 15 questions in tomorrow's session. So stay tuned for further sessions in psychology. Have a good day ahead.